What's going on, friends? When it comes to the Milwaukee 8 engine, it's been out since 2017. Things have gotten a lot better with the Milwaukee 8. But naturally, on the used market, if you're looking to move to a Milwaukee 8 engine, there's just a few things you want to be aware of, especially between the years of 2017 and 2019. Now, even some late 2019 models are okay, but generally between 2017 and 2019, these are good engines. They do have a little bit of them first-year Harley-Davidson teething problems, but once you get through those, you're really generally good to go with those engines. But as with anything, if you're brand new to Harley-Davidson and you're jumping on a Milwaukee 8, I've got 5 things today that you are definitely going to be aware of before you go in and spend your money on a Milwaukee 8 powered Harley-Davidson. Now, the absolute #1 issue when it comes to your Milwaukee 8 from 2017 to 2019 is the factory oil pump. Harley-Davidson had serious issues with oil sumping. Harley-Davidson has always had some form of oil sumping issue on every Harley-Davidson engine out there, but it's generally kind of few and far between, except on those first years of the Milwaukee 8. What Harley-Davidson had going on was an oil scavenging issue with the oil pump. Basically, what was happening is the oil pump wasn't pulling enough oil out of the crankcase and keeping a good balance of flow throughout the engine. So in other words, the oil basically just pooled up down in the sump. And this can cause you a lot of serious issues. And trust me, if you have it, you're going to notice it really quick. Guys, please don't forget, if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. Now, when it comes to oil sumping on the Milwaukee 8, pretty much what's happening is your crank is just drowning in oil. It's having to pound that oil. It's having to work through that over accumulation of oil down in the sump. Now, if you're running down the road, you're going to notice, one, a serious lack of power because your crankshaft is getting bogged down in oil. It's not being scavenged to the top of the engine properly and then flowing back down. That's that huge imbalance that happens with that original factory oil pump from 2017 to 2019. #1, loss of power. #2, the bike's going to run extremely hot. And not only that, when you let off the throttle, I know it's a V-twin. We're all used to engine braking on a V-twin, but not like this. When you let out the throttle, that thing is going to butt down to like almost nothing. And it's going to cause you some serious issues, especially if you let it go. What's basically going to happen is it's going to carbon up the engine. You're going to be sitting there starving the top end for oil. And not only that, you're going to beat the crankshaft to death, overheat the engine. All kinds of bad things are going to happen. Nothing's good's going to come of it. So the best thing that you can do is get in there and get an updated factory Harley-Davidson oil pump if it hasn't been done already. Now, if you're buying a used Milwaukee 8 within those years, definitely have the dealership check that VIN number. If it was done in a Harley-Davidson and they had a Harley-Davidson oil pump put in it, they'll have a record of it. Doesn't matter what dealer, it'll go into the network service history for that bike. So that's definitely something you want to check on. If you can't find that, I would say proceed with caution. Ride carefully, look for the signs and symptoms of that. If you notice those issues happening, go ahead and change it. In fact, I recommend going ahead and changing it immediately. Whether you want to get the upgraded Harley-Davidson oil pump or even better, go aftermarket, maybe go with the Screamin Eagle, go with an S&S, get a fueling pump, do a cam plate, maybe get a cam while you're in there. Now you're starting to see where this really starts to snowball. We go in just for an oil pump, and we leave with a cam and a cam plate and a new tune. Now, another issue on the Milwaukee 8 from those early years was basically the oil transfer issue. We were getting oil carryover from the transmission into the primary. Now, what this causes problems is kind of similar to the sumping issue. You start drowning the primary in gear oil. In the transmission, well, at the same time, it's losing oil. Now, the main things you're going to notice there is that you're going to have hard shifting issues, and even worse, you're going to notice a bunch of grinding noises because, well, your transmission is pretty much running out of oil. Now, Harley-Davidson did have a fix for this, where basically they drill a hole, put a little tube in there that kind of balances that back and forth between the transmission and the primary. Did it work? For the most part, from what I've seen, it did seem to work pretty well. And I believe later the factory started doing it. I haven't really been into a later model one after 2019, but I believe they actually started doing that from the factory. So anything 2020 or newer, that issue is already taken care of. But kind of the same issues you're going to notice is basically a lack of power because your primary is not really meant to be pushing through that much oil in the primary case, and your transmission really needs to have oil in it, and if it all goes in the primary, bad things happen. You can kind of do the math from there. And trust me, those transmissions are not cheap. If you were to have one to fail, I would highly recommend going out, spending the extra money and getting a Baker, getting something aftermarket, and go ahead and get an upgrade if you have a failure. That's if you can swing it. But if not, just go back with the OEM and make sure you get that transfer issue taken care of. Another issue to solve that is to go with actually a vented transmission cap. Basically, it's venting the transmission to where we don't have that carryover issue. That is kind of the same thing that goes back to the oil sumping issue with those older oil pumps. That is one thing that does help, is actually putting in a vented dipstick. That seems to kind of be basically a band-aid on what really needs to happen with getting that oil pump changed out. But even if you do go with the upgraded oil pump in the engine, still get the vented dipstick, and I still highly recommend getting the vented transmission cover as well. That right there will save you a lot of headaches down the road. Does it work? It's arguable depending on who you talk to, but in my experience with those, they seem to do pretty well for everybody, got them a lot more miles out of them, and solved basically the sumping issues and the oil transfer carryover to the primary problem. Now, the other issue that we had with the Milwaukee 8 in the early years, and this is really directly related to the oil sumping and the carryover into the primary from the transmission. These were some cold start issues. These bikes really seem to struggle with cold starts in some of the, well, I don't want to say like on a 50-degree day, but if you live somewhere where you're kind of in the extreme cold below freezing, Milwaukee 8 in the early years could be very, very hard to start. And this was directly related to the oil sumping issue. Now, as we all know that with any Harley-Davidson in the past that had an oil tank, if you let them sit for a while, the oil will drain down from the oil tank into the sump. But you rotate the bike over, it fires up, all that oil pumps back up into the tank, everything starts flowing properly the way it should. On the Milwaukee 8, that didn't necessarily happen. When you weren't evacuating the oil out of the sump at the rate that it needed to be due to that imbalance, it made the bike really hard to start cold, especially in cold and freezing temperatures, because at freezing temperatures, we all know oil is thicker, oil is heavier, and when you go to start the bike, you're having to crank it over and push everything through that big thickness of oil that's down in that sump. And when you're doing that, it's not getting carried back up to the top of the engine properly, which leads to another issue when eventually they did start, is that that oil wasn't properly lubricating the top end of the engine due to the oil pump, and once again, that imbalance. So that's just another kind of lesser known thing that was not really talked about, but it is an issue on 2017 and 19s with the original factory oil pump in them, not the updated one. Early Milwaukee 8s, there was some issues with very lean fuel mixtures. The goal of the Milwaukee 8 was to meet the new Euro 4 emissions coming out so they could still sell these bikes in Europe. And once again, they are also produced here in the States, meeting the Euro 4 emission standard. Now, what that caused was basically lean fuel mixtures. Now, these bikes with the 4-valve heads, they were designed to run cooler, run leaner, to actually meet these standards. That's why they started coming from the factory with an oil cooler stock. Now, the issue with that is they might have been just a little too lean on the early model bikes. This causes a lot of rideability issues. You'd notice lack of power. You might notice a lack of throttle response. You might notice every now and again that it would cough and kind of backfire back through the air cleaner. You might hear that. That is a sign of a very lean condition. And then if you went and you put just a set of slip-ons on it going, well, the computer will take care of that. That's what I always hear. Put some slip-ons on there, the computer will take care of that. Generally on a Milwaukee 8, that is true. But in those early versions of those, when you went to an open exhaust from the stock mufflers that were on there, it could really cause you some lean issues. And that was a serious problem with the early Milwaukee 8s, was the fact that they were maybe just a little too lean. You may have heard some of the horror stories out there, the oil sumping and carryover, basically fouling out on top of the pistons, getting them caked and coated with oil. And now there was that other side to it. They were running very lean at the same time. You mix that in with the oil, and just there was nothing good about it. From the rideability issues to the overheating issues that a lot of them had, all of these top 5 issues that I've talked about here, these all kind of correlated together. But if you take the steps, the early bikes are just as good as the new ones that have the updates on them. Go with the vented transmission cover, go with the vented dipstick, make sure you change the oil pump out, and also To cure that lean mixture, the only cure for that is to get a tune. Now, even with a Power Vision tuner or even an FP3 or FP4, you might still get another 5 horsepower out of it, but the fact is you're putting more fuel in the bike, you're getting more power, and in my opinion, the bike's finally starting to run the way it should from the factory. Now, those are just definitely some things to be aware of with 2017 to 2019 Milwaukee 8s. Get them tuned, take care of the issues we talked about, and guys, you'll have just as good of a bike as anything out there. Those are just the basic issues with the M8, but once we move past that, there really are pretty good motors. But anyhow, guys, what's your opinion on the Milwaukee 8? Is it worth getting one from 2017 to 2019 if you can get it cheap enough to get and go through and do all those steps to it? Or would you rather get one that's 2020 or newer, that's already got the updated oil pump in it and a lot of the fixes done? Let me know down in the comments. But anyhow, guys, that's all I've got for you this week. If y'all enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. But guys, till next week, you stay safe on the streets, ride smart, dodge those cars, and I'll catch you guys back here next week with a brand new video. Thanks for watching.